It all started, as most suburban cataclysms do, with a piece of paper. Not a court summons, not a foreclosure notice, but something far more insidious. A single sheet of beige 8.5x11 cardstock, tucked neatly under the wiper blade of my wife's SUV. It was laminated. Of course, it was laminated. Lamination is the first sign of a petty tyrant with too much time on their hands. I stood in my garage, the scent of ozone from my server racks mingling with the faint, pleasant smell of WD-40, and read the notice for the third time. My brain, a finely tuned instrument that had spent 2 decades architecting secure networks for Fortune 500 companies, struggled to process the words. Official notice of covenant violation. Date, October 26, 2023. Violation, Section 4, Paragraph B, Waste Receptacle Display. Description: on the aforementioned date, at approximately 6:35 p.m., the waste and recycling receptacles for property address 112 Arbor Lane were observed to be visible from the street. As per the Whispering Creek Estates community guidelines, all receptacles must be stored out of public view no later than 6 p.m. on the day of collection. Action required. Please ensure future compliance. A record of this notice has been added to your property file. A property file. They were building a file on me, like I was a Cold War spy instead of a guy who just wanted to grill in peace. 35 minutes. My trash cans had committed a 35-minute felony. I looked over at the offending criminals, a pair of dark green plastic bins sitting innocently against the garage wall. They looked entirely unrepentant. This had Brenda Donaldson's fingerprints all over it. You couldn't see her, but you could feel her. She was the architect of our collective misery, the self-appointed queen of the Whispering Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Brenda was a woman who wielded the book of covenants and restrictions like a holy text and interpreted it with the unbending fanaticism of a zealot. She'd once led a crusade against unapproved mailbox flags. She had personally measured the height of Todd Gunderson's lawn gnomes and found them to be a non-compliant 2.5 inches too tall. Her reign was one of aesthetic terror, built on a foundation of passive-aggressive newsletters and laminated notices. My wife, Sarah, breezed into the garage, setting her purse on a workbench. She had the uncanny ability to remain an island of calm in the seas of my perpetually brewing irritation. She glanced at the beige paper in my hand. "The garbage Gestapo strike again?" she asked, her lips twitching into a smile. "Section 4, Paragraph B," I said, my voice deadpan. "Apparently, our trash cans have brought shame upon this community. I'm thinking of requesting a jury trial. I want to see Brenda cross-examine the recycling bin. Can you tell the court, in your own words, where you were on the evening of October 26th? Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. "Just roll them in 5 minutes earlier next week, honey. It's not worth the aneurysm." "It's the principle of the thing," I grumbled. "This isn't a community. It's a tyranny by laminate. We're living in a beige dictatorship." She kissed my cheek. "Well, your benevolent dictator is making lasagna for dinner. Try not to overthrow the government until after dessert." As she went inside, my eyes drifted to the other occupant of my garage. It took up a full third of the space, a hulking, magnificent beast that was the true source of Brenda's endless pearl clutching. It was a decommissioned county emergency command bus, dark gray, almost black, bristling with more antennas than a porcupine has quills. I'd bought it at a surplus auction for a song and spent the last year of my early retirement lovingly, obsessively, restoring and upgrading it. It was my hobby, my fortress of solitude, my behemoth. The HOA had tried to have it banished, of course. They'd cited commercial vehicle statutes, aesthetic disharmony clauses, and something about it lowering the collective vibrational frequency of the neighborhood. I, in turn, had cited county vehicle codes, producing registration that clearly listed it as a recreational vehicle. I'd found every loophole. I could legally park this 40-foot, 20-ton middle finger to conformity right in my driveway if I wanted to. Keeping it in the garage was my one concession to neighborhood peace. I crumpled the violation notice into a tight ball. I walked over to the bus, opened the reinforced side door with a satisfying thunk, and tossed the paper into a small bin just inside the cockpit. "Just you wait, Brenda," I muttered to the empty garage, patting the cold steel flank of the bus. "One day someone's gonna need a problem solved that can't be fixed with a strongly worded letter." The air was still, but I could almost feel the storm clouds gathering, and I wasn't talking about the weather. 2 days later, the actual weather decided to get in on the action. I was in the living room, ostensibly watching a documentary about deep-sea exploration, but really just enjoying the blissful silence of a house to myself. Sarah was out at her book club, which meant I had sole custody of the remote and the thermostat. On the screen, a giant squid was doing something unpleasant to a sperm whale. Outside, the sky was turning a bruised, sickly shade of gray that reminded me of week-old leftovers. I flipped over to the local news. That's when I saw Bill, the weatherman. Bill was usually a beacon of suburban optimism. His forecasts were filled with great grilling weather and perfect days for the park. Today, Bill looked like he'd just seen a ghost. The cheerful graphics of smiling suns had been replaced with a swirling, angry vortex of red and yellow off the coast. Hurricane Agatha. "And I can't stress this enough, folks," Bill was saying, pointing a shaky finger at the screen. "This is not just a coastal event. The system is projected to stall right over our area, bringing with it an unprecedented amount of rainfall. We're talking historic, catastrophic flooding for low-lying areas." He used words I'd never heard him use before, words like inundation and mandatory evacuations. My casual Tuesday evening was over. Wind doesn't scare me. My house is solid brick, built on a slab. But water is insidious. It doesn't just knock on the door, it finds every crack, every weakness, and it just keeps coming. Our house was on a slight incline, the highest on the street. But the whole of Whispering Creek Estates was a masterpiece of questionable civil engineering, built around a network of quaint, babbling creeks and drainage basins that were about to become raging torrents. I grabbed my laptop, the deep-sea documentary forgotten. This was my element. Not the storm itself, but the data behind it. I pulled up topographical maps from the county GIS server, overlaying them with the latest rainfall projection models from the NOAA feeds. The picture it painted was not pretty. The beautiful greenbelt and park at the south end of our subdivision. According to the data, in about 36 hours, it was going to be a lake, a very large, very muddy lake. Curiosity, a trait that had made me a very wealthy network security specialist and a very annoying dinner guest, got the better of me. I logged into the official Whispering Creek Estates community Facebook page. It was a curated wonderland of lost dogs, complaints about teenagers, and Brenda's endless stream of cheerful, tyrannical announcements. Her latest post, from an hour ago, was a masterclass in tone deafness. Brenda Donaldson. A friendly reminder to all residents to please secure any loose patio furniture or decorative items before the storm. Let's keep Whispering Creek beautiful, even in the breeze. Stay safe, everyone. #community first. #Whispering Creek strong. I stared at the screen, a low growl forming in my chest. She's worried about a stray plastic flamingo getting loose, I thought. I'm looking at a hydrological model that shows the entire park becoming an accessory to the Atlantic Ocean. I scrolled down. A few nervous neighbors were chiming in. The first was Dave from 2 doors down, A decent guy with an unhealthy obsession with his lawn. Dave Fletcher. Hey, is anyone else a little worried about the creek? The news is saying 15 inches of rain. That seems like a lot. Brenda's reply was instantaneous, as if she were monitoring the page from a command bunker. Brenda Donaldson. At Dave Fletcher, the county has assured the HOA that our drainage systems are state-of-the-art and more than capable of handling the projected rainfall. Please, let's not cause unnecessary panic. A positive outlook is our best defense. A positive outlook. Right. I was sure the water molecules would be so impressed by our collective good vibes that they'd simply turn around and flow back uphill. That was enough. I closed the laptop and walked purposefully to the garage. The air inside felt heavy, expectant. I didn't fire up the behemoth's main engine. That was too loud, too final. Instead, I rolled out the small, whisper-quiet diesel generator I kept for backup power. With a soft whir, it came to life. I ran a heavy-duty cable to the bus's shore power inlet. Inside the cockpit, I flipped a single switch. A bank of server racks, my pride and joy, spun up with a gentle hum. A few monitors flickered on, displaying system diagnostics. Just a systems check. That's what I'd tell Sarah if she asked. I checked the pressure in the 8 massive tires, topped off the diesel tank, and verified the satellite internet dish on the roof had a clean, strong lock. The low hum of the servers was a comforting sound. It was the sound of preparation, the sound of capability. In a world run by people who believed a positive outlook could stop a hurricane, I believed in diesel, data, and a ridiculous amount of bandwidth. The rain started around noon the next day. It wasn't a gentle pitter-patter. It was a heavy, determined drumming, like an army marching on the roof. The wind picked up, turning the gentle suburban trees into frantic, swaying dancers. It was the kind of day that was custom-made for sweatpants and bad movies, but I couldn't relax. Every half hour I checked my data feeds. The creek was rising, the ground was saturated. The storm was stalling, just as Bill the weatherman had feared. At 4:15 p.m. it happened. My phone, Sarah's phone, and my laptop all shrieked at once with the unique grating alarm of the emergency alert system. It was a sound designed to cut through sleep, conversation, and complacency. The message, stark and all caps, filled the screen. Presidential alert. Mandatory evacuation for flood zone. Be issued by County EMA. Whispering Creek Estates is in Zone B. This is not a test. Evacuate immediately. Tune to local media for more information. Well, that's that, Sarah said, already heading for the stairs to pack a go-bag. Let's go. I stood at the living room window, looking out at the rain-swept street. I wasn't moving. I was listening. Everyone who lives in a disaster-prone area knows the drill. The alert hits your phone, and then, seconds later, you hear it. The sound that validates the digital scream, the network of evacuation sirens positioned strategically around the county. There was one mounted on a thick steel pole right at the grand brick and wrought iron entrance to our subdivision, less than a quarter mile away. It was a massive, cone-shaped affair that, when activated, let out a rising, deafening, air raid wail that you could feel in your bones. It was impossible to ignore. I waited. 1 second, 10 seconds. A full minute passed. Nothing. The only sounds were the roar of the wind and the relentless pounding of the rain against the glass. It was a profound, terrifying silence where a cacophony should have been. "Alex, come on!" Sarah called from upstairs. "Something's wrong," I said, my eyes scanning the street. I could see my neighbors, the Fletchers, opening their front door, looking around with the same confused expression I felt. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. I checked the County Emergency Management Agency website. The alert was plastered across their homepage in a flashing red banner. It was real. I checked their social media feeds. Real. I checked a police scanner app. The dispatch channels were lighting up with calls from confused residents. "We got the alert, but we don't hear the sirens." My phone rang. It was Dave. His voice was tight with panic. "Alex, you getting this? Why aren't the sirens on? What's going on?" "I see the alert, Dave, and I don't hear a thing," I replied, my gaze sweeping over the houses across the street, all with their lights on. "Maybe it's a glitch," he stammered. "A power failure? Did lightning hit it?" I looked at the ornate, faux gas streetlights lining our road. They were shining brightly, their light shimmering on the wet asphalt. "No, the power's fine," I said slowly, a cold, electric feeling prickling its way up my spine. It was the same feeling I used to get just before uncovering a massive, hidden security breach in a client's network. The feeling of discovering not just a random error, but a deliberate, malicious act. "This isn't a failure, Dave. This is deliberate." I hung up the phone. Someone was actively, intentionally blocking the evacuation signal. And as I stared out at the perfectly manicured, award-winning rose garden 3 houses down, I had a horrible, beige-colored, laminated suspicion about who it might be. I didn't guess. Guessing is for amateurs. In my line of work, you develop a hypothesis, and then you verify it with data. My hypothesis was that Brenda Donaldson, in an act of breathtaking arrogance and stupidity, was actively jamming a federal emergency broadcast. It was time to collect the data. I sprinted upstairs to my home office, a room that Sarah charitably called my hobby space, and my friends called NORAD's nerdy little brother. It was a sanctuary of monitors, cables, and blinking LEDs. I bypassed the high-end computers and went straight for a hard-sided Pelican case tucked under my desk. I flipped the latches and pulled out a spectrum analyzer. To the layman, it looks like a bulky, first-generation cell phone with a small antenna. To me, it was an eye that could see the invisible world of radio waves. I powered it on and tuned it to the specific frequency range used by the county's emergency siren network, a narrow band in the 450 to 470 megahertz range. The moment I keyed in the frequency, the screen jumped to life. A jagged, angry line spiked across the digital display. It wasn't the clean, intermittent pulse of a command signal. It was a solid, thick bar of noise, a powerful, crude, unsophisticated jamming signal. It was the digital equivalent of putting your fingers in your ears and screaming, "La la 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 la, I can't hear you," at the top of your lungs. It was a brute force broadcast of white noise designed to do one thing: drown out any legitimate command. It wasn't elegant. It was petty. It was perfect. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I whispered to the empty room. Now for confirmation. Pinpointing the source of a single, powerful jammer is laughably easy if you have the right tools. I disconnected the small omnidirectional antenna and screwed a much larger Yagi-style directional antenna into the analyzer. It looked like a miniature TV antenna from the 1980s. I walked over to the office window, which had a clear view down our street. I held up the antenna and began to sweep it slowly across the neighborhood. When I pointed it south, toward the main road, the angry bar of noise on the screen dropped significantly. I swept it back north. As the antenna passed over Dave's house, the signal got a little stronger. As it passed over my own house, it dipped slightly. Then, as I centered the antenna directly on the pristine 2-story colonial at 84 Tulip Court, the signal peaked. The bar on the analyzer slammed against the top of the display. It was a direct hit. The signal was radiating from Brenda Donaldson's house. Specifically, from the vicinity of her perfectly manicured, HOA award-winning rose garden. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in my head with horrifying speed. Brenda's obsession with avoiding unnecessary panic. Her pathological need to maintain the illusion of Whispering Creek Estates as a perfect, tranquil paradise, immune to the chaos of the outside world. An evacuation siren is loud, it's ugly, it signals distress, it's bad for property values. What's the point of having state-of-the-art drainage systems if you scare everyone into leaving before they can fail? The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. It was insane. It was sociopathic. It was so Brenda. I lowered the antenna, the rain-swept street outside blurring as my focus sharpened. I looked from the analyzer in my hand to the window, where the rain was now coming down in thick, blinding torrents. My gaze shifted, looking through the wall toward the garage, seeing the behemoth in my mind's eye. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had just been presented with a problem so profoundly stupid, so monumentally incompetent, that it could only be solved with the application of overwhelming technological force. Sarah appeared in the doorway, a packed duffel bag in her hand. "What are you doing? We need to pack. We need to go." I didn't turn around. My eyes were still locked on the storm outside. "Change of plans," I said, my voice quiet but charged with energy. "The neighborhood watch is about to get a serious upgrade." The garage door rumbled shut, sealing us inside. The sound echoed, a final, definitive thud that separated our world from the chaos outside. Sarah stood by the interior door, her arms crossed, watching me with an expression that was 1 part concern and 2 parts, "I knew I shouldn't have let you buy that thing." I ignored her. I was in the zone. This wasn't just starting a bus. This was an activation sequence, a symphony of engineering I had choreographed myself. I walked to the main control panel just inside the behemoth's door and began the checklist, my voice a low murmur. "Main battery array engaged." I flipped a heavy-duty master switch, a series of deep-cycle marine batteries, enough to power a small house for 3 days, clicked online. The bus's interior emergency lights flickered on, bathing the cockpit in a soft red glow. "Auxiliary power unit online." I pressed a green button on a separate panel. Outside, the 20-kilowatt diesel generator, nestled in a soundproofed compartment, coughed once and then settled into a satisfying, low thump-thump-thump. It was a sound that promised limitless electricity. "Engaging hydraulic stabilizers!" With a loud hiss, 4 thick hydraulic legs deployed from the undercarriage, grounding the bus to the concrete floor. The entire 20-ton vehicle lifted a solid inch, becoming an unshakable, perfectly level platform. Sarah jumped a little. "Bringing systems online." I settled into the plush, air-ride captain's chair. My fingers danced across a touchscreen. One by one, a cascade of 6 24-inch monitors mounted above the windshield flickered to life. The center screen displayed a topographical map of the neighborhood, already cross-referencing my live data feeds. The others showed weather radar, network traffic diagnostics, and a live 360-degree panoramic view from the high-definition cameras on the roof. "Comms active." I reached up and flipped a big, red, ridiculously satisfying toggle switch protected by a safety cover. A bank of servers in a cooled rack behind me spun up with a rising whir. Satellite link, cellular repeaters, wideband radio transceivers, my very own private, unjammable communication network was now live. I leaned back in the captain's chair, surveying my kingdom of light and sound. The hum of the electronics, the distant thrum of the generator, the cool blue glow of the screens. This was my happy place. I took a deep, cleansing breath. My plan wasn't just to warn people. A bullhorn could do that. My plan was to create a bastion of order in the midst of chaos, an undeniable, Brenda-proof source of authority. I keyed the intercom. "Computer," I said, in my best Star Trek captain voice, "activate the coffee maker." A light on the galley's high-end Swiss espresso machine blinked green, and it began to gurgle and hiss as it prepared my latte. Sarah just shook her head, a reluctant smile finally breaking through. "You are an absolute child." "A child with a 20-kilowatt generator and enterprise-grade network hardware," I corrected her. "There's a difference." I pressed the largest button on the main console, the one that opened the garage door. Slowly, dramatically, the door began to rise, revealing the rain-swept street like a theater curtain opening on the first act of a disaster movie. And standing right there, in the deluge, frozen mid-motion as he tried to wrestle a panicked, sopping wet golden retriever into the back of his minivan, was my neighbor, Dave. His eyes went from his dog to the sight emerging from my garage. The sheer, monolithic, impossibly large front end of the behemoth, its headlights cutting through the gloom. His jaw didn't just drop, it unhinged. The behemoth rolled out of the garage with the gravitas of a battleship leaving port. The rain sluiced off its flat, armored sides. It was a monster, an absurdity of engineering in a land of sensible minivans and eco-friendly sedans. As it cleared the driveway and turned onto the street, I saw faces appearing in windows. People who had been frantically packing their cars paused, bags in hand, and just stared. Jaws were agape all up and down Arbor Lane. It was as if a UFO had decided to land in the middle of our quiet cul-de-sac. I didn't just park it. I was a network architect. I understood the importance of optimal placement. I maneuvered the bus into the geometric center of the intersection of Arbor Lane and Willow Way, the main crossroads of our little section of the neighborhood. The position gave me a clear, unobstructed line of sight down 3 streets. It also, not coincidentally, completely blocked the intersection. With the press of a button, a telescoping antenna mast began to rise from the roof of the bus. It climbed, section by section, 10, 20, 30 feet into the stormy air, clearing the rooftops of the surrounding houses. At its peak was a military-grade public address speaker array, 4 massive horn speakers pointed in the cardinal directions. I could have used a siren. I had dozens of siren tones programmed into the system, from the classic police wail to the European-style high-low. But that would have been too simple, too pedestrian. This situation called for something more authoritative. I patched the audio feed from the official NOAA weather radio emergency broadcast, the one that was supposed to be triggering the sirens, directly through my PA system's amplifier. I cranked the volume to about 80%. A calm, professional, authoritative voice suddenly boomed across the entire neighborhood, so clear and crisp it sliced right through the roar of the wind and rain. PA system is now in effect for all of Zone B, including the townships of North Haven and Oakwood. Residents of Whispering Creek Estates are ordered to evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. A mandatory evacuation order is in effect. People came pouring out of their houses, not in a panic, but in a state of confused relief. They looked up at the sky, then at the source of the sound. My impossible bus, sitting in the middle of the street like a monument to overkill. The official message looped twice. Then, I picked up the heavy-duty microphone from its console cradle, took a sip of my freshly brewed latte, and keyed the mic. My own voice, amplified to the level of a rock concert, rolled across the rooftops. Alex, via PA. Good evening, neighbors. This is Alex Miller at 112 Arbor Lane. In case you didn't get the memo, we need to leave. The county sirens are currently experiencing a localized technical difficulty. I paused for effect. Please proceed in an orderly fashion to the designated evacuation routes on higher ground. I will be broadcasting traffic updates and weather advisories on the half-hour. I let go of the button, took another sip of coffee, and then keyed the mic one last time for the finishing touch. Alex, via PA. And for Brenda Donaldson at 84 Tulip Court. Just for your information, jamming federal emergency frequencies is a felony under Title 18, Section 1367 of the U.S. Code. Have a safe evening. I hung the microphone back in its cradle. A profound, beautiful silence fell, broken only by the sound of my neighbors scrambling to get the hell out of Dodge. It took less than 2 minutes. I was tracking the progress on my roof cameras. A small, furious figure in a bright pink raincoat burst out of the front door of 84 Tulip Court and began to storm up the street, her fists clenched at her sides. Brenda Donaldson was on the warpath. She didn't hesitate. She didn't slow down. She marched right up to the side of the behemoth and began banging her small, manicured fist against the reinforced steel of the main door. The thump, thump, thump was barely audible over the hum of the servers. Sarah gave me a look that said, "You created this monster. Now you have to deal with it." I sighed, picked up my coffee mug, and hit the button to unseal the door. It swung open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing Brenda, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, her hair plastered to her forehead by the rain. The cool blue and red lights of the command center's interior backlit me, casting me in what I hoped was a dramatic and intimidating silhouette. "What is the meaning of this, Alex?" she shrieked over the wind. "You are in violation of at least a dozen HOA bylaws, noise ordinances, operating a commercial vehicle, blocking a public thoroughfare, unauthorized broadcast." "Good to see you too, Brenda," I said, taking a calm sip of my latte. "Funny you should mention ordinances. I've been brushing up on federal law myself, specifically Title 18, Section 1367 of the U.S. Code. Interfering with a public emergency broadcast system. It's fascinating reading. Carries a penalty of up to 10 years in prison and a hefty fine. How are the roses holding up in all this rain?" Her face went from red to a pale, blotchy white. She sputtered, searching for a defense. I have no idea what you're talking about. My backup generator was making a funny noise. It must be causing some sort of electrical interference." I almost laughed. It was the worst lie I had ever heard. "Brenda, your generator runs on diesel and is located in your backyard. The jammer is a solid-state device putting out a clean, powerful, wide-band signal, and my directional antenna places the origin squarely in your front garden bed. Your lies are less sophisticated than your hardware, and that's really saying something." "You have no proof," she screeched, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are harassing me. You will have my lawyer on the phone so fast it'll make your head spin." "Great," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Get him on the line. I'm sure he'd love to hear all about this. While you're at it, you can prepare a statement explaining to the 200 families on this street why you decided your personal peace and quiet was more important than their homes and their safety. The creek is expected to crest its banks in 90 minutes, by the way. It's going to hit your end of the street first. You might want to move your Lexus." That was the final blow. She stood there, speechless, rainwater dripping from her nose. The righteous fury had evaporated, replaced by the cold, dawning horror of being caught, utterly and completely caught. She was cornered, and she knew it. I held all the cards, and my hand was a royal flush of federal law and spectrum analysis data. I gave her a small, tight smile, took another leisurely sip of my coffee, and pressed the button to close the door. It swung shut with a solid, definitive thunk, sealing her out in the storm and me inside my sanctuary of order. 10 minutes later, a new set of flashing lights joined the party. A county sheriff's cruiser its blue and reds strobing silently in the downpour, pulled up 20 feet behind the bus. 2 officers got out, their faces illuminated by my rear-facing floodlights. One was a sergeant, older, with the weary, seen-it-all-before posture of a man who was counting the days to retirement. The other was a rookie, young, sharp, and looking at my command bus with a mixture of awe and profound confusion. The sergeant, whose name tag read Miller, approached the door cautiously, his hand resting near his sidearm. The rookie, Sanchez, hung back, his eyes as wide as dinner plates. "Sir," Miller called out, his voice professional but strained. "County sheriffs, could you please step out of the, vehicle?" This was a critical moment. I knew how it looked. A crazy guy in a military-style vehicle illegally blocking a road. I had to handle this perfectly. I set down my coffee, took a deep breath, and opened the door. I stepped out onto the top step, my hands visible and empty. I wasn't an anti-authority nut. I was a professional who was trying to solve a logistical problem. "Evening, officers," I said, my tone calm and cooperative. "Alex Miller, glad you're here. We've got a bit of a situation." Miller's eyes narrowed. "A situation, right, sir. You do realize you've parked a... What even is this thing, sir? In the middle of a public road during a mandatory evacuation?" "I do," I said, nodding. "And I'm afraid it was necessary. There's a reason you're here and not dealing with the traffic jam on the interstate. The evacuation sirens for this sector failed to activate." I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He'd heard the same chatter on his radio that I had. "Failed?" Sanchez piped up from behind him. "Not exactly," I said. I ducked back inside for a moment and came out with my handheld spectrum analyzer, the directional antenna still attached. I powered it on and showed the screen to Miller. They were jammed, actively and illegally suppressed. See this signal? That's a high-power jammer operating on the Sirens command frequency, and it's coming from right over there. I pointed the antenna directly at Brenda's house. The bar on the screen shot to maximum. Sanchez's jaw went slack again. "So, you're saying she turned off the flood siren?" "Jammed it," I corrected gently. "With an illegal wideband transmitter. And since the official method of communication was compromised, I'm using my own legally owned, privately funded equipment to disseminate the evacuation order that she is actively suppressing. Think of it as a citizen's override." Miller stared at the analyzer, then at my bus, then at Brenda's house. A look of profound, soul-deep weariness settled on his face. He let out a long, slow sigh. "It's always Brenda," he muttered, more to himself than to me. He looked back at me, the gears turning in his head. He was in a bind, and we both knew it. Was my bus legal? Not parked like this, no. Was I blocking a street? Absolutely. Was I potentially saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in property damage and maybe even lives? Also, yes. Was Brenda committing a felony? Almost certainly. He made a command decision. "Look, Mr. Miller," he said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Technically, I should impound your... whatever this is. And I should probably arrest you for obstruction. But right now, you're the only one getting the word out, and my dispatch is a complete mess. So here's the deal." He pointed a stern finger at me. "As of this moment, you are a temporary, unofficial asset of the county sheriff's department. You're coordinating a civilian evacuation effort, got it? Don't make me regret this. Keep the evacuation notices running. Keep people moving." He turned to Sanchez. "Come on, kid. We're going to go have a chat with Mrs. Donaldson about her noisy generator." As the 2 officers trudged through the rain toward Brenda's front door, I gave them a polite, formal nod. I then retreated back into the cockpit of the behemoth. I had been deputized. Sort of. And I had a job to do. With the unofficial but official sanction of the law, I shifted from rogue operator to full-blown command center. The next hour was a blur of controlled, caffeinated chaos. I was in my element. On the main monitor, I had the neighborhood map, a custom overlay I'd built using Google Maps and county plot records. I was in constant communication with Dave via a secure text channel I'd set up on one of my servers. He had taken it upon himself to be my man on the ground, a brave, rain-soaked soldier in a polo shirt and khakis. He was going door to door, checking on the elderly and families with small children. Dave_Fletcher. The Hendersons at 91 Willow are out. They have a cat, Fluffy, they couldn't find. Alex_Miller. Roger that, Dave. Mark 91 Green. I'll keep an eye out for Fluffy on the thermal camera. Any sign of movement at the old Thompson place? Dave_Fletcher. Negative. House is dark. Car is gone. I think they left yesterday. As he cleared a house, I'd tap the corresponding lot on my touchscreen, turning it from red to green. Slowly, the map was turning into a sea of green. We were getting people out. But just getting them out wasn't enough. I needed eyes on the real enemy, the water. Deploying aerial surveillance, I announced to Sarah, who was now acting as my co-pilot and chief snack officer. From a reinforced hatch on the roof of the bus, a small, black quadcopter drone whirred to life. It rose into the stormy sky, its powerful little motors fighting against the wind. The video feed popped up on my secondary monitor, a crisp, high-definition, gimbal-stabilized view of the neighborhood from 200 feet up. I piloted it over the tree line to the edge of the park. The creek was no longer a quaint, babbling brook. It was a churning brown monster, swollen and angry, already chewing at the edges of its banks. It was rising, fast. To keep the evacuees informed, I became a one-man radio station. I fired up a low-power FM transmitter, a gray box in my communications rack, and set it to a clear frequency. Alex, via PA and FM radio. Attention evacuating residents. This is Whispering Creek Command. For traffic updates, please tune your car radio to 88.9 FM. I repeat, 88.9 FM. Current conditions show that the main access road via Oak Street is still clear, but traffic is backing up. I recommend using the secondary exit on Hillside Drive. It's a bit of a longer route, but it's moving smoothly. The human element soon followed. The behemoth had become a beacon. A frantic-looking woman knocked on the door, asking if I had a spare dog leash because she couldn't find hers. I did. An elderly man, Mr. Gable from down the street, needed help carrying a heavy box of old photos to his car. I patched him through to Dave on a walkie-talkie, and Dave circled back to help him. I was running a FEMA-level disaster response operation from the comfort of a leather captain's chair in my driveway, and it was the most fun I'd had since I retired. The shift happened just before 6 p.m. The rain, if it was possible, intensified. The tone inside the bus changed. The adrenaline-fueled fun of playing emergency czar began to curdle into the cold, hard reality of the situation. The threat was no longer theoretical. The drone footage showed it first. My eyes were glued to the screen, watching the feed from the park. It started as a small trickle, a dark finger of water probing the edge of the manicured lawn. Then, with a sudden, sickening surge, the creek bank gave way. A muddy, churning wave of water, carrying branches and debris, spilled over and began to spread with astonishing speed across the soccer field. It wasn't creeping. It was advancing. "It's breached," I said, my voice low. Sarah leaned in, her hand on my shoulder. The water, following the simple, brutal logic of gravity, flowed to the lowest point. The lowest part of the neighborhood was the far end of the cul-de-sac on Tulip Court. Coincidentally, where Brenda Donaldson lived. On the drone's camera, I watched as the brown tide hit the asphalt. The street began to disappear under the filthy water. First inches, then a foot. My voice, when I keyed the PA system again, had lost its earlier sarcastic swagger. There was a new urgency, a hard edge of command. Alex, via PA. Update from Command Central. This is not a drill. The creek has breached its banks at the south end of the park. Floodwaters are now on Tulip Court and rising rapidly. If you are still on Tulip Court or Rosewood Lane, I am not kidding anymore. Get out now. The road will be impassable in less than 10 minutes. I saw it happen. The last few holdouts, the ones who thought it wouldn't be that bad, burst from their homes. A minivan and a pickup truck peeled out, splashing through the rapidly deepening water on the street, their drivers white-knuckled, their faces pale with fear. They made it out just as the water began to lick at the undercarriages of the cars still parked in driveways. The neighborhood was almost empty. Almost. The map on my screen was all green, except for one stubborn, defiant red square at the very end of Tulip Court. The call for help, when it came, wasn't over a phone. It crackled to life over the walkie-talkie channel I'd set up for Neighborhood Watch, a frequency I was monitoring out of habit. It was a frantic, high-pitched voice, distorted by static and panic. Brenda, over the radio. "Hello, is anyone there? Can anyone hear me? This is Brenda Donaldson at 84 Tulip Court. I'm trapped. The water is rising. Hello?" I picked up my own walkie-talkie, a heavy-duty piece of equipment that felt solid in my hand. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide. I took a deep breath and pressed the transmit button. The irony was so thick, so rich and delicious, I could almost taste it. Alex, keying his mic. "I read you, Brenda. It's Alex. Funny how that works, isn't it? 1 minute you're trying to block all emergency communications, the next you're desperate to use them." A sob of relief and shame came over the radio. Brenda. "Alex! Oh, thank God! You have to help me. The water, it's in my garage. It's almost to my front door. My car won't start." I couldn't resist. I was a sarcastic jerk, and this was my Sistine Chapel. Alex. "And your illegal signal jammer? Is that still operational? I'd hate for my GPS to get confused while I'm navigating, or did you have the foresight to put it on high ground?" Her reply was a broken, sobbing mess. Brenda, sobbing. It's ruined. It's underwater. Please, Alex. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. I was just trying to... I don't know. Please, just get me out of here." She was broken. The Queen had been dethroned not by a vote, but by a flood of her own making. I looked at Sarah. She wasn't smiling. She just gave me a look. A simple, compassionate look that said, "Enough, be the better man." I sighed. She was right. I was a jerk, but I wasn't a monster. Alex. "All right, Brenda, don't move. Stay on your front porch where I can see you. And for the love of God, if that jammer somehow survived, turn it off. It's interfering with my drone's magnetometer." Even in a rescue, I had to get one last techie dig in. Old habits die hard. "Retracting stabilizers," I announced. With a hydraulic hiss, the 4 legs lifted, and the behemoth settled back onto its suspension. I engaged the transmission, a deep clunk echoing through the cabin. The bus was high enough off the ground, with its air intake well above the roofline, that it could ford up to 4 feet of water. According to my drone's laser altimeter, the water on Tulip Court was hovering around 2.5 feet. We were good to go. I eased the bus forward, turning onto her street. It felt less like driving and more like piloting a boat. The water pushed against the massive tires, creating a V-shaped wake that sloshed against the mailboxes and manicured hedges. The headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a surreal landscape of suburban tranquility drowned in muddy water. There she was. Her perfect lawn, the 3-time winner of the HOA's Lawn of the Month award, was a murky brown lake. Her prize-winning roses were just sad, thorny sticks poking out of the deluge. And on her front porch, looking small and utterly defeated, was Brenda Donaldson. She was clutching a small, white, yapping dog to her chest, her pink raincoat soaked through. I maneuvered the bus with surprising delicacy, bringing the main door right up to the edge of her porch, a maneuver that would have made a ferry captain proud. I opened the door. The warm, dry air and the glow of the monitors spilled out into the storm. "Alex, your chariot awaits, my lady. Watch your step, it's a bit of a climb." Brenda, drenched and humbled, didn't say a word. She just climbed the 3 steps up into the high-tech sanctuary she had tried so desperately to have outlawed just hours before. She sat down heavily on one of the visitors' benches, shivering, dripping water onto the industrial rubber floor. Her little dog, whose name I later learned was Princess Fluffybutt III, yapped hysterically at a server rack until Brenda shushed it. The ride back to my house was silent. The only sounds were the thrum of the engine, the sloshing of the water outside, and the quiet hum of my electronics. It was the most awkward silence I have ever experienced. She was too ashamed to speak, and I was out of snark. The reality of the situation had sobered me. I didn't have to say anything. On one of the main monitors, the drone feed was still live. As we pulled away, I angled the camera down to give her a perfect, top-down view of her house. She watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the brown water swirled around her front door, creeping up the pristine white siding. It was the ultimate "I told you so," and I didn't have to say a single word. 2 weeks later, the sun was shining. The world had dried out, leaving behind a thick, uniform coating of brown mud on everything. The neighborhood was a chaotic symphony of sound. The roar of dehumidifiers, the whine of saws, and the thud of ruined drywall hitting the bottom of dumpsters. Piles of waterlogged furniture and sad, soggy carpet lined every curb. Whispering Creek Estates was a disaster zone. The behemoth was parked in my driveway, washed, clean, and gleaming. It was now a local landmark. People didn't stare in horror anymore. They waved. They brought me cookies. Dave had tried to organize a parade. I shut that down immediately. My driveway, however, had not survived the ordeal unscathed. The immense weight of the bus, sitting on its stabilizers for hours, had left a network of spiderweb cracks in the concrete. I'd called a contractor. Sal was a big, burly man with a salt and pepper beard and hands like catcher's mitts. He stood there, looking from the cracks in the concrete to the bus, a look of profound respect on his face. "Sal, so let me get this straight. You used this thing to save the whole neighborhood from the wicked witch of the HOA?" The story had already become legend. I think Dave was working on the screenplay. "Alex, that's the gist of it," I admitted. "The weight might have done a number on the concrete, though." Sal let out a booming laugh and slapped the thick steel side of the bus. The sound echoed like a drum. "Sal, are you kidding me? A few cracks in the driveway is a bargain for a story like that. I'm giving you a discount. We'll call it the community hero rate. Forget the cracks. I just have one question. You really got a fancy coffee maker in that thing?" An hour later, Sal and I were sitting in the 2 captain's chairs of my bus, sipping perfectly brewed espressos. In the distance, I could see Brenda, no longer a queen, just another resident in muddy boots, supervising a crew as they shoveled silt out of her living room. I looked out over the recovering neighborhood. The quiet was nice, but I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that it wouldn't last. Sarah had shown me the email that morning. The annual HOA elections were in 2 months, and someone, probably Dave, had already officially nominated me for president.